What if I told you that when an empath experiences spiritual awakening, they don't just elevate their consciousness, they become a portal between dimensions? Stay with me, because what Carl Jung discovered about spiritual emergence will completely transform how you understand the empath's true purpose in this world. Carl Jung said that spiritual awakening is the soul's recognition of itself beyond the material realm. But here's what most people don't realize. When an empath awakens spiritually, they unlock something Jung called the transcendent function, at a level that ordinary consciousness can't even comprehend. And trust me, by the end of this, you'll understand why spiritually awakened empaths are the most powerful conduits of universal energy that exist on this planet. According to Carl Jung's research on spiritual psychology, there comes a moment when the separation between the conscious and unconscious mind dissolves. But for empaths experiencing spiritual awakening, this dissolution is exponentially more profound. They don't just access their unconscious, they access the collective unconscious of humanity itself. Here's what Jung discovered that will blow your mind. The spiritually awakened empath begins to feel not just individual emotions, but archetypal energies. They sense the collective grief of humanity. They feel the universal hunger for truth. They experience what Jung called numinous encounters, direct contact with the divine intelligence that underlies all existence. This isn't imagination. It's what Jung termed expanded consciousness, and it's absolutely unstoppable. The empath who was once overwhelmed by feeling everything suddenly understands why they feel everything. They weren't cursed with sensitivity. They were chosen as receivers. They are living antennas for consciousness itself. Carl Jung understood that spiritual awakening requires what he called ego death, the dissolution of the false self that we've constructed to survive in the material world. But when an empath experiences this death, it's not just personal, it's cosmic. Here's where it gets absolutely fascinating. The spiritually awakened empath realizes that they were never just themselves. They've been carrying the wounds of their ancestors, the karma of past lives, the collective shadow of humanity. Jung discovered that empaths are natural psychopomps, guides between worlds, and spiritual awakening activates this ancient role. They begin to understand that every person who hurt them was playing a role in their spiritual curriculum. Every betrayal was designed to break open their heart. Every manipulation was meant to teach them discernment. This isn't about excusing abuse. It's what Jung called teleological thinking, understanding that everything serves the soul's evolution. And once an empath grasps this truth, they become absolutely free. Listen carefully to what happens next, because this is where the empath's entire reality gets rewritten. According to Carl Jung, spiritual awakening unlocks what he called latent psychic abilities. But for empaths, these aren't abilities they're gaining. They're abilities they're finally allowing themselves to acknowledge. The spiritually awakened empath stops dismissing their intuition as coincidence. They stop explaining away their visions as imagination. They stop minimizing their capacity to feel energies that others can't perceive. Jung discovered that empaths in spiritual awakening often experience what he termed synchronistic phenomena at an accelerated rate. Numbers appear repeatedly, dreams become prophetic, thoughts manifest into reality with shocking speed. They meet the exact person they needed to meet. They receive messages through songs, conversations, even strangers on the street. This isn't magical thinking. It's what Jung called a causal connection, the universe responding to consciousness itself. The awakened empath realizes they're not separate from the universe. They are the universe experiencing itself through a particularly sensitive vessel. And that realization, according to Jung's research, changes absolutely everything. Carl Jung said that spiritual awakening brings with it a natural purification process. But for empaths, this purging is absolutely ruthless. Relationships that don't serve their highest evolution fall away effortlessly. Jobs that drain their soul become unbearable. Living situations that don't match their frequency become impossible to maintain. Here's what most people miss about this phase. The spiritually awakened empath isn't pushing things away. They're simply vibrating at a frequency where anything inauthentic can't exist in their field. Jung called this psychic hygiene, the automatic clearing of energies that don't align with one's true nature. Friends they've known for years suddenly feel like strangers. Family members they've tolerated become toxic. Habits they've maintained for decades become repulsive. This isn't cruelty, it's what Jung termed soul alignment. The awakened empath is being guided by something far more intelligent than their personality. They're being guided by their higher self, their soul, the divine intelligence that Jung spent his lifetime studying. And here's the part that will send chills down your spine. According to Carl Jung, this purification process is irreversible. Once an empath awakens spiritually, they can never go back to unconscious living. They've seen behind the veil. They know the truth. They've tasted freedom. And that knowing becomes the compass for the rest of their existence. Carl Jung discovered that spiritual awakening isn't about transcending darkness. It's about integrating it. But the spiritually awakened empath takes this integration to a level Jung called the mysterium conjunctionis, the mystical marriage of opposites within the soul. They understand that their capacity for deep love comes from their capacity for deep pain. Their ability to hold space for others' darkness comes from their willingness to face their own shadow. Their power to transmute energy comes from their experience of being transmuted by suffering. Jung found that spiritually awakened empaths become what he termed wounded healers, but not in a broken way, in a sacred way. They realize their sensitivity isn't a flaw in their design, it's their superpower. They weren't meant to be like everyone else. They were meant to feel what others can't feel, see what others can't see, know what others can't know. This recognition, Jung discovered, is the moment when an empath stops trying to fix themselves and starts embracing their divine assignment. According to Carl Jung, the highest form of spiritual development is what he called individuation through love. But for the spiritually awakened empath, this love transcends all personal attachments. They begin to love from a place Jung termed agape, unconditional, universal, cosmic love. Here's what Jung understood that most people miss. This universal love doesn't make the empath weak or available to everyone. It makes them exquisitely discerning. They love all beings from a spiritual perspective while maintaining impeccable boundaries in the physical realm. They can hold compassion for someone's soul while refusing to tolerate their behavior. They can forgive completely while walking away permanently. The spiritually awakened empath becomes what Jung called a vessel of divine love, channeling love without attaching to outcomes, giving without depleting themselves, healing without taking on others' wounds. They've learned the sacred art of loving from overflow rather than from depletion. And that shift, according to Jung's lifetime of research, makes them capable of miracles. Carl Jung said that spiritual awakening always comes with what he called a divine assignment. For the spiritually awakened empath, this assignment becomes crystal clear. They're here to raise the frequency of the planet. They're here to anchor light in dark spaces. They're here to show humanity what conscious living looks like. Jung discovered that these empaths often feel called to completely different paths after awakening. The corporate job no longer makes sense. The conventional life feels suffocating. They're drawn to healing, teaching, creating, guiding, anything that serves the collective evolution. This isn't about ego or recognition. It's what Jung termed serving the self, the capital S self that represents one's highest purpose. The awakened empath understands that their suffering wasn't random. It was preparation. Every dark night of the soul was a shamanic initiation. Every betrayal was a spiritual test. Every heartbreak was cracking them open to hold more light. And now, standing on the other side of their awakening, they see the perfection in every painful step of their journey. According to Carl Jung, spiritually awakened individuals don't just see the world differently, they create a different world. The spiritually awakened empath embodies this perfectly. They become living proof that consciousness can evolve, that pain can transform into wisdom, that sensitivity can become spiritual mastery. And here's the final piece that makes them absolutely unstoppable. Carl Jung discovered that spiritually awakened empaths operate from what he called synchronicity with the divine. They're in constant communication with universal intelligence. They receive guidance through intuition. They're protected by forces they can't see. They're supported by a benevolent universe that recognizes them as conscious co-creators. This is what happens when an empath awakens spiritually. They don't just change, they transfigure. They don't just heal, they become healers. They don't just survive. They become proof that spiritual awakening is not only possible, it's the empath's ultimate destiny.